Welcome back to Talk Treatises. It is good to have you with us. Today we are clearing the table, turning down the lights, and getting ready to do some heavy lifting. We are entering the engine room of human thought.
It is certainly not a light beach read today.
No, absolutely not. We are doing a deep dive into a book that is, well, arguably one of the most important yet intimidating texts in the history of philosophy. We are talking about John Stuart Mill's A System of Logic.
Specifically, the 1882 8th edition, which is sort of the definitive version.
Right. And I know what you're thinking. Logic, really? Is this going to be an hour of symbols and, math equations? But that is not what this is it?
Not at all. And that is the common misconception. When we hear logic today, we think of computer code or abstract symbolic representation. But for Mill, logic wasn't just about whether an argument was constructed correctly. It was a battleground.
A battleground.
A crusade, even. He wasn't writing a textbook for a classroom. He was trying to rebuild the entire foundation of how human beings know anything is true.
That is the hook right there. This is a book with a mission. It feels like Mill is standing at the gates, trying to hold back a tide of what he considered to be dangerous, fuzzy thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into the syllogisms and the inductions, I think we have to talk about the man himself, because you can't really understand why this book is so aggressive about experience unless you understand the laboratory experiment that was John Stuart Mill's childhood.
That is a perfect place to start. You have to remember, Mill wasn't just a philosopher. He was a manufactured genius.
Mm-hmm.
His father, James Mill, was a strict utilitarian and a massive intellectual figure in his own right.
And he decided he was going to create the perfect intellect.
Exactly, a thinking machine.
Manufactured is the right word. I mean, the stories are legendary. Learning Greek at age 3.
Greek at 3, Latin at 8. By the time he was a teenager, he had read more classical literature and history than most university professors. But here's the catch. He was raised entirely on logic and analysis.
Right. His father explicitly kept him away from poetry, from emotion, from anything irrational.
He was built to be a thinking machine.
And like any machine run at redline for too long, he broke.
He did. At age 20, he had a massive mental breakdown. He realized that even though he could analyze any argument, he didn't actually care about anything. The analysis had, stripped the world of its color.
And he eventually recovered famously by reading Wordsworth, right?
Yeah.
Poetry.
Exactly. It taught him the value of emotion and experience.
And that context seems so crucial for A System of Logic, because when we read this book, we see a man who is obsessed with proving that knowledge comes from the outside world, from experience, from the senses, not just from spinning gears inside your head.
Which puts him in direct conflict with the intuitionists.
The intuitionists. Who were they?
So this is the intellectual battlefield of the 19th century. On one side, you had this explosion of scientific progress. Chemistry, physics, biology were all taking massive leaps. But in philosophy, especially in the universities, there was this lingering dominance of what Mill called the German school.
Thinkers like Kant?
Kant, or in Britain, William Whewell. These were the intuitionists.
These are the guys who say, we hold these truths to be self-evident.
Precisely. They believe that there are certain truths, mathematical truths, moral truths, logical truths, that the human mind just knows a priori.
Meaning before experience.
Right.
Yeah.
They argued that the mind has a structure, a set of innate categories that allows us to grasp truth without needing to go out and check the world. To Mill, this was intellectual heresy. And worse, it was politically dangerous.
Politically dangerous. That seems like a stretch for a debate about geometry or logic. How does believing in innate ideas make you a political threat?
Because if you believe that truth is known by intuition, then you're essentially saying, I am right because I feel like I am right, and I don't need to offer evidence. Mill saw this as the great fortress of conservatism and prejudice. If you can justify a moral belief, say, about the role of women or the structure of government by simply saying it is an intuitive truth, then you shut down debate. You shut down progress.
So he wanted to show that all knowledge, every single scrap of it, comes from experience and observation.
Even math. Even logic itself.
So his mission is to drag philosophy down from the clouds of intuition and anchor it firmly in the soil of experience. He wants to force you to show your receipts.
Exactly. He wants to prove that we don't know things because our minds are magically wired to know them. We know things because we have seen them happen over and over again. And that brings us to the core thesis of this massive work.
Okay, let's hear it. If we had to boil A System of Logic down to a single sentence, what would it be?
It would be this. Logic is the science of proof, not just the science of consistency. It's about evidence.
Okay, let's unpack that. Logic is the science of proof. That sounds straightforward, but it's actually a radical shift from how logic was usually taught, right?
It is. The traditional view, what we call formal logic, is basically the rules of the game. It tells you if A is true and B follows A, then B is true. It doesn't care if A is actually true in the real world.
It only cares if you're being consistent.
Right. You could argue all unicorns are pink, this is a unicorn, therefore it is pink, and formal logic says, great job, that's a valid argument.
It's garbage in, garbage out, but the machine works.
Exactly. Mill says that is not enough. That is just keeping your story straight. He defines logic as the science of evidence. It is the judge in the courtroom.
The judge in the courtroom.
It doesn't go out and collect the clues. That is for the scientist, the observer. Logic is the discipline that sits on the bench and looks at the evidence brought in and asks, is this enough? Does this actually prove what you say it proves?
I love that analogy. Logic as the judge, not the detective. And to be a good judge, you have to understand the language being used in the court. Which brings us to the first big hurdle Mill clears. Language itself.
A huge part of the early book.
He spends a huge amount of time just talking about names and words. Why start there? Why not jump straight to the arguments?
Because language is a trap. We often think we are studying things or reality, when actually we are just studying the names we have given to things. Mill warns us that if we aren't careful, we end up arguing about definitions rather than facts.
And this is where he goes after the old scholastic idea of realism.
Right. Realism versus nominalism.
Okay, this is a classic philosophical dinner party debate, but let's make it concrete for you. What exactly is Mill fighting against here?
The realists, and we're going back to the Middle Ages here, believed that if you have a word, say, man or whiteness, there must be a real universal essence of man or whiteness existing somewhere, like a ghostly blueprint.
And Mill is a nominalist.
Yes. He says, no, words are just labels we put on individual things. There is no mystical essence of a horse floating in the ether. They're just individual horses, and we use the label horse to group them together because they look alike.
So when I talk about justice, there isn't a spirit of justice floating around. There are just specific just acts, and I'm using a label to group them.
Exactly. And this leads to that famous distinction he makes between connotation and denotation. This is one of those concepts that sounds technical, but it's actually the key to understanding how we fool ourselves.
Okay, high school English class flashbacks. Denotation is the dictionary definition, right? Yeah. And connotation is how the word makes you feel.
Not exactly, and this is where Mill gets really specific and, frankly, very clever. In Mill's logic, connotation isn't about emotion. It's about information.
Information. Okay.
Let's break it down. To denote means to point. It's a finger. If I say the President of the United States, I am pointing my finger at a specific human being. That's the denotation.
Right.
But connote means to imply attributes. The term president connotes authority, the role of commander-in-chief, residence in the White House.
Okay, that makes sense. The word carries baggage, or information, as you say.
Right. Now, here is where the trap lies. Mill says proper names like John or London have denotation but no connotation.
Wait, really? If I say London, I immediately think of tea, rain, red buses, and the Queen. That feels like connotation.
That is mental association, not logical connotation. Mill argues that the word London doesn't imply rain. If London became sunny tomorrow, it would still be London. The name is just a tag on the city. It points to the object, but it implies no attributes.
Ah, I see. But if I call it the capital of England, that's different.
That connotes a political status. If the government moved to Manchester, London would no longer be the capital. The name would no longer apply.
So London is just a label, a post-it note. The capital is a description.
Precisely. And Mill's warning is that we constantly confuse the two. We think because we have a name for something, we know its nature. We mistake the tag for the luggage. We argue about the definition of liberty or God or matter, as if the definition itself contains the truth.
Without checking if there is any object in the real world that actually matches the attributes we've shoved into the word.
Exactly.
So we have cleaned up our language. We are looking at evidence, not just definitions. Now we get to the part of the book where Mill starts smashing idols. And the biggest idol in the Temple of Logic is the syllogism.
The sacred cow of Aristotle.
Everyone learns this in Logic 101, the classic example.
All men are mortal.
Socrates is a man.
Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Now, hold on. This seems perfect. It seems airtight. I use this kind of thinking every day. Why on earth does Mill look at this and say, This is useless.
He doesn't just say it's useless, he says it's a petitio principii.
Which is Latin for begging the question.
Right. It means the conclusion is already hidden inside the premise.
How so? It feels like a progression. We start with a big truth and move to a small truth.
That is the illusion. Mill asks a very simple, very powerful question. How do you know that all men are mortal?
Well, because everyone we've ever seen or heard of has died.
Yeah.
John, Peter, Thomas, all of them.
Okay, but all men includes Socrates. So to be able to say all men are mortal with absolute certainty, you already have to know that Socrates is mortal. If you didn't know Socrates was mortal, you couldn't honestly say all men are mortal.
You would have to say all men except maybe Socrates are mortal. Oh, I see. So if I assert all men are mortal, I'm essentially claiming I've checked everyone, including Socrates. So when I get to the conclusion, therefore Socrates is mortal, I'm not learning anything new. I'm just repeating what I already assumed.
You are just unpacking a box you packed yourself, Mill says. No reasoning from generals to particulars can, as such, prove anything, since from a general principle we cannot infer any particulars, but those which the principle itself assumes as known.
So if I already know the Duke of Wellington is mortal, Mill uses the Duke of Wellington in the text, which is such a specifically British example. If I already know the Duke is mortal to make the major premise true, then the conclusion the Duke is mortal doesn't teach me anything. I just walked in a circle.
A very tidy, logical-looking circle, but a circle nonetheless.
But wait a minute. If deduction is a circle, then how do we know anything? We use general rules all the time. Arsenic is poisonous. Fire burns. Are you telling me those are fake?
No, they aren't fake. But Mill says we have misunderstood what they are. He argues that we never actually reason from general to particular. That is a fiction we tell ourselves.
So what's the real process?
The real process of reasoning is always from particulars to particulars.
Yeah.
From experience to experience. He uses the famous example of the village matron.
Right. The woman in the village who cures her neighbor. Paint the picture for us.
So imagine a village woman. Her neighbor's child, Mary, is sick with a fever. The woman gives Mary a specific herbal remedy. Why? Does she have a medical degree? Does she know the universal proposition all humans with these symptoms respond to this alkaloid?
No, probably not.
Of course not. She says, this herb cured Lucy when she had the fever, and it cured my brother Tom when he had the fever, so it will cure Mary.
She is moving from one particular fact, Lucy, to another particular fact, Mary.
She skips the general law entirely.
That feels much more like how our brains actually work. We pattern match.
It is. And Mill says that the general statement, this herb cures fever, or all men are mortal, is just a memorandum. It is a note we write down to remember all the individual cases we have seen. It is a register.
I like that image. A memorandum.
Yeah.
So the general law isn't the proof. It's just the filing cabinet where we store the proof.
And the proof is always the actual deaths of John, Peter, and Thomas that we witnessed.
The particular.
Precisely. The general proposition is a bridge we build to get from past experience to future experience. But the bridge itself isn't the ground. The ground is the specific facts. This completely demystifies deduction. It turns the syllogism from a tool of discovery into a tool of interpretation. It helps us check our notes, but it doesn't give us new knowledge.
This brings up a really controversial point, though. If all knowledge comes from experience, what about math? 2 + 2 = 4. Surely that is true regardless of experience. I don't need to count apples to know that. That's what the intuitionists would say.
They would. And this is where Mill makes one of his boldest and frankly most criticized claims. He says, no, math is empirical. We learn that 2 + 2 = 4 by playing with pebbles as children.
Come on. You're saying if I grew up in a different universe, 2 + 2 might equal 5.
And Mill would say, we can't know for sure, but the only reason we are so confident that 2 + 2 = 4 is that we have seen it demonstrated billions of times without exception. Every time you combine 2 objects with 2 objects, you get 4. The evidence is overwhelming, but it is still evidence. It is an induction from experience.
That is mind-bending. He's taking the most abstract thing possible and dragging it down into the mud of reality.
He has to, because if he admits that one thing can be known without experience, the intuitionists win. He has to hold the line. The entire system depends on it.
So if deduction, the syllogism, is just checking our notes, then where does the real magic happen? Where do we get new knowledge?
That leads us to the heart of Mill's system, induction.
Induction.
Yeah.
This is the process of generalizing from experience, going from this swan is white and that swan is white to all swans are white.
Correct. And this is where the battle against the intuitionists really heats up. Because the problem with induction, and philosophers like David Hume had pointed this out before, is How do you know? How do you know that just because the sun rose yesterday and the day before, it will rise tomorrow?
How do you know the universe is consistent?
Yes, that is the nightmare scenario for an empiricist. If you can't prove the future will be like the past, then all your experience is useless for prediction.
And the intuitionists would just say,
They'd say, we know the universe is consistent because it's an innate idea. Our minds are built to know it. Mill refuses to accept that. He has to ground even this, the uniformity of nature, in experience.
but isn't that circular? If I say nature has always been uniform in the past, so it would be uniform in the future, aren't I using induction to prove induction?
Mill bites the bullet here. He admits it. He says the belief in the uniformity of nature is the ultimate major premise. It is an induction, but it is the biggest, most rigorous induction of all.
An induction that validates all other inductions.
Exactly, because human beings have observed the world for millennia, and in every single instance, across every single field, we have found patterns, we have found laws. It starts as a loose guess induction by simple enumeration, and as science progresses, it hardens into a certainty.
So it's a bootstrapping operation.
Yeah.
The more we look, the more we see laws. The more we see laws, the more confident we become that there are laws.
Yes, and the core of this uniformity for Mill is causation.
Causation. This is another word that Mill fights to redefine. Because again, he strips away the metaphysics. He doesn't want to hear about secret powers or efficient causes or mysterious forces that bind A to B.
No, for Mill, a cause is simply the invariable, unconditional antecedent.
Invariable, unconditional antecedent. Let's break that down. Invariable means it always happens before. Antecedent means it comes before. But what about unconditional? That's the key part.
That is the crucial distinction, and he uses a famous puzzle to explain it. Day and night. Think about it. Night always follows day. Day always follows night. It is invariable. We have never seen one without the other eventually following.
Right.
So, is day the cause of night?
Common sense says no. But if causation is just invariable succession, why not?
Because it is conditional. The sequence of day and night depends on something else, the rotation of the Earth and the presence of the sun. If the sun went out or the Earth stopped spinning, the sequence would break. It is not unconditional.
I see.
A true cause is something that, if it happens, the effect must follow, regardless of other conditions.
So the rotation of the Earth is the cause. Day and night are just the effects.
Right. Mill calls them derivative laws. They are uniformities, but they aren't causal laws. This distinction is vital because if you confuse derivative laws with causal laws, you make bad predictions. You might think day causes night, and then be very confused when a solar eclipse happens.
This focus on figuring out what actually causes what leads us to perhaps the most practical part of the book, the toolkit. Mill realizes that nature is messy. We can't just stare at it and know the causes. We need methods.
We need a way to sift through the noise. And this is where we get the 4 methods of experimental inquiry. These are famous in the history of science. They are basically the rule book for how to do an experiment.
And instead of just lifting definitions which can get dry, let's apply these. I want to look at a real historical example that happened right around Mill's time. The Broad Street cholera outbreak of 1854. This is the story of John Snow.
Oh, this is the perfect case study, a brilliant example.
So for you listening, London, 1854. People are dying of cholera. Thousands. The leading theory at the time was miasma, bad air. They thought the smell of the sewers was causing the disease.
But John Snow, a physician, suspected it was something else. He suspected the water. Now, let's watch how he uses Mill's logic to prove it.
Okay. First, he could use the method of agreement.
Right. The rule is, if 2 cases of a phenomenon have only one circumstance in common, that circumstance is the cause.
So Snow looks at the victims. He goes to the houses where people died. Victim A is a rich merchant. Victim B is a poor widow. Victim C is a child. They eat different food, live in different sized houses, breathe slightly different air. But what is the one thing they agree on?
They all drew water from the Broad Street pump.
Exactly. The method of agreement suggests the pump is the cause. But Mill warns us, this method is weak. Why?
Because of the plurality of causes. Maybe they all drank from the pump, but maybe they also all bought bread from the same baker. Or maybe they all lived on the same street, which would support the miasma theory. Agreement isn't enough.
So Snow needs something stronger. The method of difference.
This is the gold standard. The rule, if an instance where the phenomenon occurs and an instance where it does not occur differ in only one circumstance, that circumstance is the cause.
And Snow found this, didn't he? The perfect control group.
Yes. The Lion Brewery. Right next to the pump, there were 70 workers inside. They breathed the same air as the victims. They lived on the same street. But none of them got cholera.
Why?
Because they were allowed to drink beer from the brewery for free, so they never drank water from the pump.
That is the method of difference in action. You have two groups, the neighbors and the brewery workers. Everything is the same. Location, air, social class, except the water. Yeah. One group dies, the other lives.
Therefore, the water is the cause. It isolated the variable. It allowed Snow to say, with confidence, it's not the air, it's the water.
Then we have the method of residues. This one's a little more subtle.
Well, it's basically subtraction. If you have a complex effect and you know that part of it is caused by A and part by B, then the remainder, the residue, must be caused by the remaining factor C.
So in the cholera case,
you might look at total deaths in London. You know some are caused by age, some by existing sickness. If you subtract those and you still have a massive spike in deaths that can't be explained, the residue points to a new specific cause, the outbreak source.
And finally, the method of concomitant variations.
That's a mouthful, but it just means things moving together. Sometimes you can't remove a factor. You can't turn off the miasma to test it.
Right, but you can track the intensity.
Exactly. And Snow did this too. He looked at water companies. One company moved their intake pipe further upstream where the water was cleaner. The other stayed in the dirty part of the Thames. Snow showed that as the water got dirtier for one company's customers, their death rate went up. As the other company's water got cleaner, their death rate went down.
The two variables moved together concomitantly.
It's correlation implying causation, but a specific kind, a rigorous tracked variation.
It's incredible. These four methods, agreement, difference, residues, and concomitant variations, are the engine of induction. They are how we move from stuff happening to scientific laws.
They are the tools that built the modern world.
But the mind is a tricky thing. We don't always use these methods. We are prone to errors. And Mill dedicates a huge section of the book to fallacies.
Right. Not just listing bad arguments, but categorizing why we make them. He is very interested in the psychology of error.
One of the biggest categories is fallacies of observation. This is where we just flat out see things wrong. Or we don't see them at all.
Non-observation. The classic example is the Temple of Neptune. A Roman is shown a painting of all the sailors who prayed to Neptune and survived a shipwreck. The priest says, "Look how powerful Neptune is. Everyone who prayed survived."
And the man asks,
"But where are the paintings of those who prayed and drowned?"
Selection bias. We see the hits and ignore the misses.
Exactly. We overlook the negative instances. This is a massive problem in superstition and pseudoscience. I took this remedy and got better. Well, what about the 100 people who took it and didn't get better? You aren't observing them.
But the most interesting fallacy, and the one where Mill really goes after his enemies, is the fallacy of inconceivability. This brings us right back to the intuitionists.
This is his direct attack on men like Whewell and Descartes. They argued that if you cannot conceive of the opposite of a proposition, then the proposition must be true.
Like, I cannot conceive of a world where two straight lines enclose a space. Or, I cannot conceive of a body acting where it is not.
Right. Or, to use a historical example, I cannot conceive of people walking upside down on the other side of the earth without falling off. For centuries, the idea of the Antipodes, people in the southern hemisphere, was considered logically impossible because it was inconceivable to the imagination.
But obviously it isn't impossible. Australians exist. I've met them.
Exactly. Mill argues that inconceivability is just a limitation of our own minds, our habits, and our history. It is not a law of the universe. Just because you, a 19th century European, can't imagine something doesn't mean it can't be true.
It's like gravity. Before Newton, it was inconceivable that the sun could pull the earth without a string or a fluid connecting them. Action at a distance was considered magic.
Yes. And now we accept it as basic physics. Mill's point is, don't confuse the limits of your imagination with the limits of reality. Your intuition about what is possible is just a hardened prejudice formed by your limited experience.
That is a humbling thought. It means we have to be constantly suspicious of our own common sense.
And that is exactly Mill's goal. He wants to smash that reliance on gut-feeling truth because it stops inquiry.
This leads us to the final and perhaps most ambitious part of the book. Mill doesn't just want to fix physics and chemistry. He wants to apply this rigorous logic to the messiest subject of all.
Us. The logic of the moral sciences.
Book 6. It is often published separately because it is so influential on its own. Mill asks, can we have a science of society? Can we study humans the way we study rocks or stars?
It's a tough question because humans have free will, or at least we think we do, and we are incredibly complex. You can't put a nation in a test tube.
You can't use the method of difference on the French Revolution.
Exactly. You can't run it twice, once with Robespierre and once without, to see what happens. So Mill says, the social sciences can never be exact sciences like astronomy, but they can be approximate sciences.
He compares it to tidology, the science of tides.
That's a great comparison. We know the laws of gravity, but we can't predict the exact splash of every wave because the coastline is too complex. But we can predict the general high and low tides.
So we can know the tendencies of a society, even if we can't predict what one person will do.
Precisely. And Mill criticizes two wrong ways of doing social science that were popular in his time. First, the chemical method.
This is the empiricist politicians, the guys who say, hey, this tax got worked in America, so it will work in France.
Mill mocks this. He says it's treating society like a simple chemical reaction. It ignores the fact that the elements, the people, the culture, the history are totally different. You can't just transplant a law from one context to another without understanding the underlying causes.
And the other wrong way is the geometrical method.
This is the abstract philosophers. Think of Hobbes, or even Bentham, Mill's own father's school. They try to deduce all of human behavior from one single principle, like all men act out of self-interest.
And then they try to build a perfect government just based on that one axiom.
It's too simple. It treats humans like lines and triangles, ignoring the complexity of emotion and habit.
So what's the right way?
Mill proposes the concrete deductive method. It's a mix. You start with the laws of individual psychology, how the human mind works. Then you deduce how those laws would play out in a specific social setting. And then, this is key, you verify it with history.
It's a feedback loop. Psychology gives you the hypothesis, history gives you the data, but there is a missing link, isn't there? Mill says we need a new science to bridge the gap. He calls it ethylogy.
Yes, and he doesn't mean animal behavior, which is how we use that word today. He means the science of character.
The science of character. This sounds almost sci-fi.
It was his dream. Mill realized that you can't just go from human nature, which is universal, to politics, which is specific. You need to understand how circumstances shape human nature into national character.
Why are the French different from the English? Why are Spartans different from Athenians?
It's not biology, he says. It's the laws of character formation. He wanted to map out exactly how laws, climate, education, and government create the personality of a people.
He thought this was the key to progress.
He did. If we could understand ethology, we could scientifically design our educational systems and our laws to produce better human beings. We could craft a society that fosters liberty and nobility, not by guessing, but by scientific proof.
That is both inspiring and a little terrifying. It brings up the whole nature versus nurture debate. Mill is clearly on the nurture side here.
He is a radical environmentalist in that sense. He hates the idea that character is innate. He believes character is made. And if it is made, it can be made better.
So, stepping back, we have gone from the definition of a name to the death of the syllogism to the triumph of induction to the science of society. What is the legacy of this massive doorstop of a book?
It is the foundation of the modern scientific method, particularly in the social sciences. Before Mill, philosophy was often obsessed with essences. What is the nature of justice? Mill shifted the conversation to evidence. What are the causes of just behavior?
He moved us from metaphysics to methodology. He gave us the rule book for figuring out what is true in a messy world.
And he warned us, a warning that is still so relevant today, not to trust empirical laws in politics without understanding the causes. Don't just look at a chart and say, line goes up, so it must be good. Ask why. Use the deductive method. Connect it back to human nature.
It's a plea for rigorous thinking in an age of hot takes.
It is. Mill is telling us your intuition is probably wrong. Your logic might be a circle. Your observations might be biased. But if you are careful, if you use the right methods, if you test your ideas against reality, you can actually know the truth. And that truth can make the world better.
That is a powerful place to land. But as is our tradition here on Talk Treatises, we can't let you go without testing these ideas ourselves. We're going to move into our thought experiments segment.
Let's do it.
Disclaimer. These are hypothetical scenarios for entertainment and educational purposes only. We're going to stress test Mill's logic.
Okay.
Thought experiment number 1, the chaos switch. Mill builds his entire system on the uniformity of nature. The idea that the future will resemble the past is the ultimate major premise.
Right, the foundation of everything.
So imagine a universe, let's call it the chaos verse. In this universe, there is a switch. When the switch is flipped, the uniformity of nature turns off. Not fully, but for 1 hour every day, the laws of physics become random. Gravity might push instead of pull. Fire might freeze. Bread might nourish or poison. Here's the question. If you lived in that universe, is logic possible?
This is a nightmare for Mill. If the uniformity of nature is not absolute, if it has a break in it, then induction collapses. You can't generalize from experience because experience is fundamentally unreliable.
But wait, let me push back. Even in that universe, couldn't I be logical for the other 23 hours? I check my watch, I see it's not chaos hour, and I proceed with logic.
Mill would say no, because how do you know your watch works? Your watch relies on the consistent uncoiling of a spring or the vibration of a quartz crystal. If the laws of physics are random for an hour, your watch loses its reliability. You don't know which hour is the chaos hour, because your instruments for measuring time are themselves subject to the chaos.
Okay, fair point. But I still exist. I can still think. I am hungry.
Can you? Hunger implies a biological state where food resolves a lack of energy. In the chaos hour, maybe food turns into poison. Maybe hunger is satisfied by staring at a wall. If the connection between the feeling and its consequence breaks, your internal definitions dissolve.
So it's not just that the world gets weird, it's that I get weird. My own thoughts stop making sense because they're all based on patterns that no longer exist.
Exactly. You can't have a concept if the reality it points to triggers randomly. Language itself relies on attributes staying stable. If bread means food now and rock an hour later, language dissolves. It proves Mill's point. Logic isn't just a classroom game. It's the structure of survival in a consistent universe.
It really highlights how fragile our knowledge is. We take the sun rising for granted, but if it skipped just once, the whole edifice of reason might crumble. Okay. Thought experiment number 2. The ethological dictator. Mill champions liberty. He wrote On Liberty, another famous book. But in A System of Logic, he argues for ethology, the science of character formation.
Right, the science of how circumstances create character.
So imagine a future government possesses the completed, perfect science of ethology. They know exactly which inputs, what school curriculum, what architecture, what TV shows, what diet will produce exactly which type of citizen. They want to create a population that is perfectly rational, nonviolent, and happy. They use the concrete deductive method to design a society that manufactures these perfect citizens. Does Mill's logic support this? Or does it destroy his politics?
This is the ultimate tension in Mill, and it's a difficult one. Logically, he has to say yes. If the science is valid and if character is formed by antecedents, then refusing to use that science to create better outcomes would be irrational. If you know that allowing a certain type of chaotic upbringing produces criminals, and you have the power to prevent it by changing the antecedents, logic says you should.
But politically, this is the death of freedom. It's the Clockwork Orange scenario on a global scale. If the state creates your character before you're even born, do you have free will? Can you even call it your character?
Mill tries to save free will by saying we can help form our own character. But if the ethological dictator controls the inputs that form the desire to form your own character, you are trapped. The dictator makes you want to be good. You feel free, but you are programmed.
So it suggests that if Mill's logic is fully realized, if we truly master the science of human nature, we might engineer ourselves out of the very liberty Mill cherished.
The science of character might end up being a tool for the ultimate tyranny, a scientific utopia where everyone is good but no one is free. It is the dark side of the Enlightenment. If humans are just part of the natural world, governed by cause and effect, then eventually we will figure out how to control the causes. And once we do, freedom becomes a very difficult concept to defend.
That is something to chew on. Mill's system of logic isn't just dusty old books. It's the code that runs our scientific world, and it asks questions we still haven't answered. We have linked the text in the description below if you want to brave the 19th century prose yourself. It is dense, but it is brilliant.
Definitely worth the effort.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We will see you next time on Talk Treatises.